Yeah, look, I think that, a lot of transparency around actually what is in products, labeling. I think there's a lot of, I don't know, misconceptions with people. People don't know the difference between guaranteed analysis or typical analysis. People don't often realize that, the first 5 to 6 ingredients that they're reading on that ingredient panel are what make up the lion's share of that product. So I definitely think that we should be paying more attention to that. We should be educating people on how to read those things. And I would say that there's a lot of work that we have to do as independent pet retailers to undo a lot of the work that has been done from very large marketing companies. I think that there needs to be actually standards in place. Australia doesn't have currently any pet food standards whatsoever. You can pretty much bag up anything and put a dog's face on it and it can be classified as pet food. And then, on top of that, we throw around terms a lot like AAFCO approved. And AAFCO really, whilst people see it as a badge of honour, AAFCO is a minimum standard. So all you're saying is at the bare minimum, we're meeting some kind of base level of what your pet should have. If you want to be looking for something that's fantastic, you should be looking something that well exceeds AAFCO standards.
We are here with the lovely Luke from Fetch House in Sydney. Thank you so much for coming and having a chat today.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Good to finally make it
Anytime.
after all the chatting.
Excellent, excellent. Now, tell us a little bit about, I know you've been in the pet industry for quite a long time. Do you want to give us the quick elevator pitch on sort of where you've come from and where you are now?
Sure, I'll try and make it as quick as possible.
Ish.
I've been in the pet industry. I've been in the pet industry for 25 years. So when I first started, I was doing dog walking and dog grooming. Then I started working in a pet store and worked for a very entrepreneurial person in a company called My Pet Warehouse, and basically worked my way through sort of store manager, area manager, and went up into buying and marketing roles. So went from there, then moved into a company called Best Friends, and then went on to a pure play online business called Pet Culture, which was owned by Woolworths. Then when Woolworths purchased Petstock, I decided that I was sick of creating everybody else's dream for them. And I had wanted to open my own business and do my own thing for, at least sort of 8 to 10 years. And I had a realization moment where I was like, what am I waiting for? To die, because I'm, not getting any younger, and I need to put my money where my mouth is. So, yeah, I sold a house and basically invested all the money from the sale of the house into Fetch House. And, I guess my whole concept around my business was that I was just at the point in my career where I was sick and tired of, really having to, I guess, do things that went against my morals or recommend things that I wasn't a huge fan of. And I wanted to create a space where, ultimately the products that were on my shelf that I could stand by and that I would use with my own pets and that I trusted. And I also wanted to create an environment where, we really educate people and tailor the information or the advice per the customer, with no agenda. I'm not a puppet for any brand. I am there with the pet first mentality. And yeah, I think that I just wanted to get to the point where I didn't need to, satisfy a board of directors or, investors in a business by having sales numbers on paper, and, achieving or delivering specific things. Whereas I feel with what I'm doing in the long run, I will be successful, but also at the same time, I can go to sleep at night with a moral compass, knowing that what I'm doing is genuine. And that was probably the most important thing for me. Yeah, that's probably the quick maybe 1.5, 2 minute version.
Excellent. Now, all of that being said, you're very much telling the truth when you say you won't recommend products that you haven't tried yourself or that haven't been tested on your boys.
Yes,
Yeah?
definitely. Literally everything on my shelf I have used at any given time, and some of the products I've actually sampled and tried myself. There's a probiotic called Purple Boost, which I definitely do take myself as well. So
Oh,
yeah, 100% stand stand by the things that are on shelf. And I guess through the use of the product and understanding the way they work, especially as somebody that has a very sensitive French bulldog, it positions me very well to be able to give the right type of advice based on personal experience, and also being on the shop floor speaking to customers, I get that firsthand information from how other people's clients dogs react to things and problems that I'm able to fix through recommendation.
absolutely. And you've got some pretty high standards when it comes to product ingredients, haven't you?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the worst things in the pet industry, globally, is the fact that um, we're kind of dictated to through the people that have the most money, and the people that manage to get the most airtime. And it's at the point where, I think that we see certain avenues of voices of authority. For example, vets are often thought of as a voice of authority, but yet they are really a GP. They're not a nutritionist. So people take the advice and then they don't even flip the label around. They just go, well, the vet said that's what I should have. So that's therefore correct and gospel. So yeah, I'm very specific. Like, sometimes I will have people come into my store who will be trying to, obviously, they're looking for people to stock the brand. And because of my time in the industry, you know, I more often than not will already know the product, and it may come across as maybe arrogant to some people, but for me, I'm just like, look, save your spiel because your product will not be going on my shelf. Like, I already know enough about it and I know what's in it. And it doesn't align with the values of my business. I more see that as me having a standard and also me not wasting anybody else's time on them going through their normal sales pitch when it's not going to end up going anywhere.
Fair enough too. We were talking off camera a little bit this week about one of our pet hates, which is product labelling, and what we'd like to see happening generally in the industry, as opposed to what we often see on shelves, not so much yours at the moment.
Yeah.
So tell the viewers and listeners a little bit more about your take on that side of things.
Yeah, look, I think that a lot of transparency around actually uh, what is in products, labeling. I think there's a lot of I don't know, misconceptions with people. People don't know the difference between guaranteed analysis or typical analysis. People don't often realize that, the first 5 to 6 ingredients that they're reading on that ingredient panel are what make up the lion's share of that product. So, I definitely think that we should be paying more attention to that. We should be educating people on how to read those things. And I would say that uh, there's a lot of work that we have to do as independent pet retailers to undo a lot of the work that has been done from very large marketing companies. Understanding ingredients. There's certain brands when people come in and they tell me that that's what they're feeding at the moment and tell me the problems that they have. And I guess, I'm quite across most of the formulas. And with certain brands, even if I'm not across the formula, I can pretty much say, well, look, it's going to have maybe chicken as the first ingredient. Then you're going to have, cornmeal, wheat gluten, sorghum, and just go through a list. Pearled barley, a lot of these cheap fillers that are in the products. And then when I actually go to the computer screen and bring up the formula for the customer, I will then just highlight the ingredients, and they're usually quite blown away by probably realizing it for the first time, but also the fact that you're able to have a generalization with certain brands of what you imagine would be in it. But yeah, I think that there needs to be actually standards in place. Australia doesn't have currently any pet food standards whatsoever. You can pretty much bag up anything and put a dog's face on it, and it can be classified as pet food. And then I think, also on top of that, we throw around terms a lot like AAFCO approved. And AAFCO really, whilst people see it as a a badge of honor, AAFCO is a minimum standard. So all as you're saying is, at the bare minimum, we're meeting some kind of base level of what your pet should have. If you want to be looking for something that's fantastic, you should be looking something that well exceeds AAFCO standards. So I kind of feel like we've gone from the point where AAFCO was considered a real benchmark of food to now realizing that AAFCO is literally saying you are providing the bare minimum, not this is, really top quality product. And I also think that there is definitely a lot of misinformation, specifically about raw diets, in my opinion. There is propaganda that's pushed that you can't eat raw because of pathogens and, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, where you source your product from and what the companies, I guess, process is around where they get their meats from and the way they process things and their own standards, just the same way that I have standards. Other companies have really top-notch standards like that as well. You're not going to end up with your dog getting sick from pathogens if you're feeding a brand like Proudy, for example, because their product is top tier. If you're going and feeding just another person that pops up online that has, a raw product that they're peddling and they're buying, end of line meat that's not really fit for consumption, then sure, you're probably opening yourself up to that. But it really comes down to being educated and making sure that you're making the correct choices with the information that you have, or seeking information if you don't know the answer. Sorry, that was a very long-winded response, but
No, those are good actually. That's what we want. That absolutely works. So speaking of raw feeding, and speaking of kibble, there's a lot of very passionate debate going on online about that. Some people are, as you've mentioned, and rightly so, very wary about raw. Some, on the other hand, are completely anti any kind of kibble, and it's the devil, don't go near it, etc., etc. Um, my sense is that there needs to be a little bit more movement towards the middle there. I mean, look, I'm a raw feeder. I will freely admit that. But at the same time, you've got to acknowledge that that's not going to suit everyone, everyone's budget, everyone's lifestyle. It doesn't suit every dog. They're all built differently, and some of them physically have problems digesting raw. They need something cooked, or they need certain proteins, or they have certain sensitivities for whatever the reason is. Some dogs just may do better on a diet that contains kibble. So what's your approach when you're talking to those sorts of customers? What sort of things are you suggesting to them to help them get the healthiest outcome they can?
first of all, I would say 100% agree with everything that you just said. Like, each individual situation is different, whether it is from a budget perspective, whether it is what somebody, prefers to feed, raw is always my go-to because I do truly feel like it is the best. But, the approach that I take with it really, like, there's so many leading questions in the beginning. Um, I think that sometimes people are taken back a bit because I'm actually invested. So if they come in and they ask me something from a nutritional standpoint, or what's the best food for my dog, I'll always be like, okay, cool, I've got a few questions for you before I start firing away with what could be options for you. Are there sensitivities? Does your dog have bad skin? Does it have an upset stomach? Does it have any proteins that it can't stomach? Also, what type of feeding do you lean more towards? Do you understand what air dried and freeze dried is? Like, there's a lot of products that are on the market that people don't even actually really know what they are. They just see it as a very expensive 4 kilo bag of food without realizing the calorie density of the product and the way that it's processed. So I like to go through all of those processes first, and obviously find out what they are feeding or what they have fed, and if that has caused any adverse reactions.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Thank you so, so much. We got to get you back because there's so much we could talk about.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure, anytime.